to a gravity environment.
Yeah, it's very interesting. A lot of that fluid shifts to your head from your legs, from what I understand. And we had Rajachari on the Crew 6 launch broadcast last week who mentioned that even astronauts who don't typically wear glasses are prescribed glasses when they go to space because that fluid, from what they believe and understand, can put pressure on your eyeballs and change your vision while in space.
Yeah, my favorite fun fact about that is it also changes your sense of taste.
Yes.
So you hear a lot of astronauts saying that they really love hot sauce and spicy food.
Yes, I've
So if
heard
you're
that too.
ever sending a package to space, send some hot sauce.
This is a live view from inside Dragon Endurance. You've got Nicole Mann, your commander of Crew 5, on the left, and Josh Cassada, pilot, on the right. You can see they are monitoring the crew displays in front of them. Again, a fully autonomous flight is what we anticipate, but that is where they would be able to take over and take control of the spacecraft if need be. However, things looking good for that undock command to be sent approximately 7 minutes from now.
This is a really great view of the crew displays. So there are three displays in the Dragon spacecraft. On the left-hand side of the screen, you can actually see the forward view. So they're looking at an imager that's looking at the docking port. And sort of in the upper right corner, they can actually see a representation of which thrusters are firing on the vehicle. In the middle, they've got a set of their procedures. So in this case, it's what we refer to as event details, but it's really the list of events that'll happen as the vehicle transitions through all these states. And then they've got a map of where they are on the world, which also gives them some indication of when burns are upcoming. And then on the right side, it looks like Josh has got a status page up of the vehicle. You can sort of see there's a bar there on the left. If we were to get any alerts or cautions on board the vehicle, he'd be able to quickly move from that page and address and triage those alerts and see if they have any impact or crew actions associated with them.
Speaking of that map of the world, currently the International Space Station is flying 270 statute miles just south of Australia. And again, tomorrow we're expecting that splashdown to come just off the coast of Tampa, Florida. You can see their visors are also still up, so I anticipate that they'll get the call to lower those visors here shortly as we are awaiting that undock command.
Yeah, the visors are one of the components that the crew can open or close without having an impact on the leak checks that they performed earlier. We ask that they keep all of their gloves and zippers.
Endurance, SpaceX on the big loop. Final reconfigurations for undock complete and nominal. Houston and Hawthorne teams have pulled go for the undock sequence start at 07:15 and separation at 07:20. When ready, confirm visors down and crew are ready for undock and departure.
Dragon copies. Crew, all visors are down. We are ready for undock and departure.
We copy.
And right on time, they got the call to lower those visors because Dragon is go to undock, both from teams here in Hawthorne as well as Mission Control in Houston, and the crew reporting that themselves. So now we get to wait for the undocking sequence to begin. And once it happens, it'll take less than 5 minutes for Dragon to separate from the International Space Station, where it has called home for almost 6 months.
Yeah, and the first step in that automatic undocking sequence is for the umbilicals to retract. We've got 2 umbilicals on the Dragon spacecraft that connect Dragon to the space station, and they provide power from the space station's power system, those big solar arrays, as well as telemetry and a command path between the vehicles while Dragon is docked. And once the umbilicals are detached, then Dragon will unlatch itself from the space station. It'll release what are called 12 hard capture hooks in 2 separate phases. You might hear that referred to as the gangs of hooks. We need 11 of those 12 hooks to have a good seal on the vestibule, which is that pressurized volume in between the station and Dragon. Of course, that volume is unpressurized right now since we're about to depart. Now, all of that takes about 4.5 minutes, and then Dragon will be ready to depart from station and will begin moving itself away using a firing of its Draco thrusters.
And like I mentioned earlier, the initial departure for Dragon from the space station looks different than Soyuz, because Soyuz relies on springs to push it away from a docking port, whereas we'll see those 2 short thruster firings to undock. Those are using a combination of the 12 Draco engines around the base of the capsule. The first breaks any stiction between Dragon and the docking port, and the second will slowly back the spacecraft away. So we are expecting the call for the undocking sequence to begin right around 11:15 p.m. Pacific time. So in the next few minutes, we should get that call, but everything checking out so far. We've got all of our crew members suited up in their seats, just monitoring the ride home.
Yeah, so those thruster firings are actually pretty helpful as well because they give us a little mini checkout of the propulsion system before we start using it for some of those bigger burns. We actually did do a propulsion system checkout ahead of the undocking sequence. So we've talked a little bit about the leak checks that happened, and we've talked about the vestibule depressurization. But actually, over the last few days, there have been a number of checkouts performed to make sure that the comm systems, the propulsion systems, the suits, everything in the vehicle is healthy in the correct configuration for undock. So this is kind of that one extra free check we get with the Draco firings, and it means one less mechanism on the vehicle.
Got about 2 minutes until that undocking command is sent and that sequence begins, those hooks releasing. Now, as we mentioned, this is coming about 15 minutes behind when we initially thought we would undock. We've got a series of checks that we go through that both teams on the ground and the crew, obviously on the International Space Station, both in Dragon and on the station side, need to make sure everything's checked out before departure. But we have a window for these undockings that will still allow the crew members to splash down at the same time tomorrow. So it's a little bit different. Actually, it's quite a lot different from those instantaneous launch windows that we have. Whereas if you do not launch on that exact second, your trajectory is not lined up to meet with the International Space Station. So you get a little more grace when it comes to an undocking.
Yeah, and a lot of that has to do with the orbital mechanics. When you're higher up in orbit, you actually need less thrust to make a bigger change in your orbit. There are some Newtonian equations you could go work on to figure out why. I'm not going to try to explain it all right now because I probably wouldn't do a very good job of it. But it is a function of the orbital mechanics. And because of that, while we do try to leave on time, it's more important that we review the data and understand that the vehicle is in a healthy state. And Dragon can actually make up a little bit of a delay, or even if we were to depart a little bit early on the undock sequence. There's a set of onboard flight computers.
Endurance and station Spacex on the big loop undock sequence commanded.
Dragon copy.
So call from the core there that the undock sequence has started. We also heard a call on the loops that the umbilicals have begun to retract. So with Dragon getting ready for the undock sequence, I think it'd probably be a good time to check in with Dan at Mission Control at Johnson. Dan?
Hey, thanks, Shiva. Yeah, we can see the umbilicals retracting. They're just about completed.
Umbilical demate complete and nominal.
Dragon copy.
All right, we heard the confirmation the umbilicals have demated. Again, those provided hardline power and data connections. Those have now detached. The first set of 6 hooks are now driving. Reminder, we've got 2 different sets of hooks, each in sets of 6, 12 total. After the first set has released, we are committed to an undocking. So that first set, 6, is driving now, and we expect all of this to take another 3 minutes or so before we get that physical separation when those thrusters on Dragon will fire and begin backing Crew Dragon Endurance away from the space station. So again, umbilicals have retracted. That undocking sequence being commanded right on time at the new time. At about 15 minutes after the hour, the first set of hooks are now driving to release. Following that, the next 6 will immediately start to disengage. And then once those have separated, the thrusters will fire. We'll get the 2 quick undocking burns. That first one only being about 1.5 seconds, so just a real quick pulse of those service section Dracos to start backing Dragon away, and then a slightly longer one of about 5 seconds to increase that rate. But we are on our way right now, still a couple of minutes until we get that physical separation, still waiting for that first set of hooks to disengage. But again, a lot already done to get here. The station itself still in the attitude control over on the US segment. We've done something called inhibiting desats, so essentially no thrusters on the station are able to fire right now. So attitude fully in control of the
First set of hooks open and nominal, second set of hooks traveling.
All right, first set open, second set opening. We are now committed to an undock, so this next set of 6 are going to open. We should have them open within the next 2 minutes, and then we'll get physical separation, and we'll call you an undocking time. And we're seeing nominal performance so far on the second set of hooks. Standing by should be within about a minute or so until this second set opens. That'll be all 12 opened, and there will be no physical mechanism still in place holding Dragon to the international docking adapter. We're looking at it attached to the forward port on the station to that docking adapter. As soon as this next set opens within the next minute, Dragon's going to fire a real quick burst, again about 1.5 seconds to start backing away, and that'll be our physical separation, and that'll be our time of undocking. After that initial undocking burn, we'll do another one lasting about 5 seconds, keep backing away, and then we'll do a couple of departure burns to eventually bring Dragon out over top of the station, around, and then underneath. But for now, we are all eyes on that last set of hooks holding Dragon in place, where it's been for more than 150 days attached to this forward port on the space station. Standing by for physical separation.
All hooks open.
All hooks open. Depart burn 1 has fired. Dragon Endurance undocked 262 statute miles over
And
the Coral
Dragon
Sea.
SpaceX on the big loop, separation confirmed.
Second copies, we see it.
So a successful separation. Again, Dragon undocking at 1:20 a.m. Central Time, 2:20 a.m. Eastern Time, with Dragon and station flying 262 statute miles over the Coral Sea off the northeastern coast of Australia. So with that, Dragon now stepping into
Depart
these
burn
depart
0
burns.
nominal.
Second copies.
All right, so undock burns completed. That depart burn 0 completed. Next one coming up in just a couple of minutes, but with Dragon now flying free, I'm going to toss it back over to Shiva and Leah at MCCX and Hawthorne to take us through the rest of the flight.
Thanks a bunch, Dan. So we had some great shots there of the first depart burn. We're coming up on depart burn. So that was the depart burn 0, and now we're coming up on depart burn number 1. Now this will be a short firing of the Dragon's Draco thrusters, the burn just lasting about 16 seconds. You can see that Dragon has begun to fly away from the space station, and these initial depart burns essentially increase the range rate from the station so we can get away from the International Space Station and get out of these various different spheres of control around the vehicle that keep both of the vehicles safe.
So we heard a call for successful depart burn 0. That's 16-second burn. That increases the speed at which Dragon is flying away from the station. It's going to start to send it up and over the space station. It'll eventually come down and then behind the space station. This depart burn 0 puts crew Dragon Endurance and Nicole, Josh, Koichi, and Anna on their journey home. So there's a good look at where depart burn 0 takes us. We'll also be standing by for depart burn 1. That's another short burn, about 21 seconds. That's going to keep us on that trajectory to go over and then eventually down and behind the International Space Station. Depart burn 1 is also going to be what's going to send us out of the keep out sphere. That is an invisible sphere around the International Space Station. It's a boundary, 200 meters in radius, and it helps us determine, or helps us govern visiting spacecraft arriving or departing the space station. So before moving into that keep out sphere, you have to your spacecraft must be configured so that it would not cross that boundary for at least 4 orbits, even if for some reason it lost all maneuvering. So we monitor that before and after departure. Crew Dragon continuing to make its way further from the space station.
We're continuing to get some really cool views from the International Space Station cameras. So this one's got Dragon, and it looks like one of the robotic arms in the foreground, Dragon in the background. And of course, the opportunity today was a little bit delayed from the initial timing, but as a result, it turned out that we had better communications coverage so we could actually get some of these views from the space station. Now, Leah, I really like your explanation of the keep out sphere. I kind of analogize it to if you've ever flown into a major airport, there's an air traffic control team who's governing who can come into the airport, what timing they should go do that. And the keep out sphere is one of those imaginary constructs that allows the flight control teams of the visiting vehicles, as well as the flight control team in Johnson, to make sure that everyone is safe and no one is inadvertently entering to a place that is habited by people.
Yeah, and we have a couple of those boundaries. The keep out sphere is the one closer to the space station, and the other is the approach ellipsoid. That one is a 4 kilometer by 2 kilometer, again, an ellipsoid. It's more, it's not as much of a sphere. And it is also an imaginary shape, but it also helps us monitor those arrivals and departures of any and all visiting spacecraft.
Station on the big loop.
Right station.
Duke and Crew 5, magnificent sunset departure. You guys look great. Great job up here. We're going to miss you. Godspeed.
Awesome. Thank you, Frank, and the rest of the crew. We'll be following along.
Some kind words exchanged between the crew members. They were talking about the big loop. So that is the way that we refer to the combined communications between Mission Control in Johnson, the International Space Station, visiting vehicle, so Dragon, and then, of course, controllers here in Hawthorne.
Yeah, and we were talking about the approach ellipsoid. So what we're in right now, where we're talking on that big loop, this is joint operations. Both mission control teams working together with Crew Dragon, with the space station, and we are actually coming right up on depart burn 1. So that's what's going to take us up and over the station. But yes, it must be a little. Oh, and confirmation that depart burn 1 has started. Again, this is about a 21-second burn using those service section Draco thrusters.
And every once in a while, thank you to the ground station or the ground operators on the Johnson side. They give us some higher.
Dragon SpaceX on the big loop, depart burn 1 nominal, and we see Dragon on a nominal trajectory away from station. At this time, you are go to doff suits per procedure 4.012. And finally, I have a reminder that the big loop will be deactivated following Dragon's exit from the approach ellipsoid.
Dragon copies, and to the teams at NASA and SpaceX, thank you for an incredible expedition. It has been your tireless efforts and attention to detail that have helped make this mission successful. I can't tell you how great it feels to be part of such an incredible team. And to the crew on board the International Space Station, you've got it. Make us proud. We'll be following along your mission. And to our friends and family, thank you for following along and being a part of our mission. It has been a privilege to add to the legacy. Semper Fidelis.
It is absolutely overwhelming to back away from the International Space Station and gain some perspective on the place we've called home for almost half a year.
Station copies,
All of
Duke.
us
Safe flight.
are incredibly proud.
So a few
It's
things.
absolutely overwhelming to be backing away from the International Space Station and gain some perspective on the place we've called home for almost half a year. All of us on Crew 5 are incredibly proud of the work we've accomplished while we were there. And to everyone who had a role in Expedition 68, whether direct or indirect, you should feel the exact same way. We thank you, and we're excited to get back to that beautiful planet of ours and those wonderful people who live on it. Thank you.
That was a beautiful view of the space station. I see it. All the mission control centers all over the world, thank you very much for your support. It's a privilege and a pleasure to work with all of you at the mission control centers. And Expedition 68 crew, Sergey, Dmitry, Frank, Steve, Woody, Southbound, and Andre, bon voyage, and we'll be following along. Thank you. Arigatou gozaimashita. Spasibo большое.
Very much for everyone, for everybody, for April 9th. I'm really happy to have that problem and visible and forgettable in my life. It's really cool. Thank you very much for everybody.
Some words from all four Crew 5 members giving a final farewell to the International Space Station as...
And Dragon Houston on the Big Loop. Dragon has exited the Keep Out sphere. We wish you safe travels and looking forward to seeing you back on Earth.
Copy, Houston.
So we just heard from the Capcom, the capsule communicator in Houston, that Crew Dragon has exited the Keep Out sphere. That was the imaginary boundary we were talking about just moments ago. 200 meters in radius around the station. One of those safety zones while we are in joint operations that help us monitor any spacecraft arriving or departing. So before moving into the Keep Out sphere, again, that the rule essentially is the spacecraft, if it for some reason lost maneuvering capability, it would not cross into that border for at least 4 orbits. But of course, departing, we don't have that same requirement. They are now well out of the Keep Out sphere and heading toward the approach ellipsoid.
Flight rules and the mission control teams there, each operator is evaluating their systems to ensure that Dragon is safe to enter both the approach
Dragon
ellipsoid.
SpaceX on Dragon to ground for suit storage.
Go ahead, Jake.
Hey Josh, I've just got a reminder here, 6 months later to store suits with helmet visors closed. How copy?
We got it. Thanks a lot for the reminder.
Some friendly words from your friendly neighborhood core. Of course, the crew have been on the space station for about 6 months. So the little quirks of how do you pack things in the vehicle safely to make sure, in this case, that the visors don't get scratched or damaged, just reminded them to keep them closed in the suit bag. They do actually get some training on the space station to kind of remind them about some quirks about the vehicle, actions that they need to take during the undock sequence and the departure sequence. So Josh acknowledging that.
Everybody needs a refresher every now and then. And again, we are outside of the keep out sphere. We are standing by for approach ellipsoid exit. That's a 4 kilometer by 2 kilometer invisible boundary again. And once we are out of the approach ellipsoid, that ends joint operations. So the International Space Station mission control team will go back into their nominal configuration where they are just monitoring the space station, and the team here in Hawthorne will continue monitoring the return flight of Dragon Endurance.
Yeah, and one of the key differences with the approach ellipsoid is that vehicles outside of it have to be on what's called a 24-hour free drift safe trajectory. So what that means is if the vehicle had no ability to control its attitude, to control its orbital parameters, it would not be on a trajectory that could potentially interact with the space station for at least 24 hours. That gives time for ground operators on the ISS side to consider an adjustment to the ISS's trajectory, but ideally for the visiting vehicle team.
Dragon SpaceX, we had you 5x5 on the cabin mic.
So call there from Koichi.
We have you loud and clear also. Thank you.
Now at this phase, because we're outside of Depart Burn 1 and on our way out of the approach ellipsoid, we've actually given the go to the crew to doff their suits. So that means taking off their suits. As we talked about a little bit earlier, there's an umbilical that connects the suits to the comm system, but once they're out of that, they actually have to use a cabin mic that's in the cabin, and we always want to maintain communication with the crew in case we need to provide them any urgent instructions or if they need to give us any information. So it's just a check there that all the systems are working as they proceed into a more comfortable phase of the phasing mission.
Now we are continuing to stand by for that approach ellipsoid exit, but if you saw as Dragon was undocking from the International Space Station, the colors shifted on the spacecraft itself, and that's because the International Space Station and Dragon entered an orbital nighttime. So they see a sunrise and a sunset every 45 minutes, which seems pretty inspiring, to be honest. And they even mentioned the beautiful sunset that they got as they were traveling away from the space station. Dragon is now about 600 meters away from the International Space Station with Depart Burns 0 and 1 complete as planned and heading toward the approach ellipsoid
All hooks
exit.
open, Depart Burn 1.
Now again, it's about a 19-hour ride home for the crew inside Dragon. Hopefully they get a nap in there somewhere, but they won't really be on duty during that time because the spacecraft is an autonomous one, so they don't need to take over and pilot it whatsoever. They are definitely trained to do so, as we've discussed, but if things are moving smoothly, which we anticipate, they should be able to rest and enjoy 19 more hours in space before they are back home sweet home.
There might be a little bit of a nice change of pace to have some off-duty time. I think I heard Dan mention earlier that the crew did have to sleep shift a little bit for this particular undock opportunity. We even caught a few views of them sort of resting up while they were in the vehicle waiting for the undock sequence. So during this off-duty period, they'll be free to use the amenities on board Dragon, to have a meal, to just sleep if they want to. And then of course, as we get closer to the actual entry deorbit and landing sequence, then we will make sure that they have redonned their suits, have done their preparation for fluid loading, have confirmed that the cargo is all in a safe configuration for entry, and then they'll get suited up again in their seats for the deorbit burn and entry sequence.
Yeah, things are pretty quiet and from now until
stepping
then.
into
Depart Burn 0
next,
nominal.
like you said, big milestone, which they'll need to put their suits on for, will be that deorbit burn. That afterwards, we'll see the nose cone close. Obviously, that was open when we departed station. That's how the crew members ingress and egress the station. They have not used that side hatch in 6 months, so they'll finally get to open that up once again tomorrow once they're pulled on to Shannon, the ship that is waiting off the coast of Tampa for the splashdown tomorrow night. Yeah, and we had some views of it earlier when we were looking at the camera behind the crew. So if you can imagine in your mind's eye where the center display was, the hatch that they've been using to enter the International Space Station, that's one of the hatches that we closed today. The side hatch was a little bit lower down. The crew don't really interact with that. They can, of course, open it in an emergency.
on the ground, but the recovery teams will actually do most of the work there so the crew can stay nice and comfortable in their seats. And that also helps with some of the microgravity to gravity adjustment that we had been talking about.
So I want to read off a few of these stats for our crew members. 3 of these crew members on Crew 5 are first-time flyers: Nicole Mann, Josh Cassada, and Anna Kikina. And then Koichi Wakata, he actually just completed 500 days in space just a few days ago. He will, by the time of splashdown tomorrow, have 505 days in space across 5 different missions.
Nous sommes go pour la mise à feu. H-10, 9, 8, 7, 6. Départ séquence mise à feu.